Welcome to Spill the Beans. Today we're going to do a quick and easy wood grain tutorial. This is my absolute favorite wood grain technique. First, I like to start off with a cardboard box that comes from cereal or crackers. This type of pre-packaged cardboard is good for two reasons. This technique uses a lot of water, so if you're using paper, it tends to warp and cardboard can take a lot of water. Second, this is also extremely thin, so when you cut this up and you glue it to your project, it doesn't take up a lot of space. It doesn't have a lot of bulk to it. So it is good because it's thicker than paper and it's thinner than normal cardboard. So first I'm going to start with cutting it out along the seam of the boxes, just getting rid of all of the flappy doodles that are there. Cut. For this particular project, I am doing a wood floor, so I needed some planking. So I just decided to go ahead and use the spine of the box as a template. So just cut that out and then trace it onto the cardboard. I recommend doing the entire sheet before you cut it out, so that way it's easier. You don't have to do each individual plank, and you can get really nice wood grain patterns over a wider area that then you will cut, and it looks a bit more natural. So I'm using the base tone. You can really use anything if you think about different wood and different stains, but for this one I'm doing oak, so I'm going to start with a yellow ochre, and then I put a little bit of a lighter yellow into it because I need this one to be lighter because I'm doing a project where it needs to contrast with a black. So I wanted a lighter oak color. So you just start with the base and you brush that all on. Make sure that your brush strokes all go in one direction. This is a wood grain, so wood tends to grain in one direction, so you want to make sure that all of your brush strokes throughout this process go in one direction. Now I'm adding a little bit of a darker color. This one is a burnt sienna, just to give it a little bit of warmth. I am focusing on the outside edges of the planks, but really you could pretty much put it anywhere. I recommend using a cheaper brush for most of this because wood grain is a natural, uneven sort of pattern, so you don't want real nice, straight, even brush bristles. Before I get too much further, because I'm not going to get into it in this video, I just want to remind you, if you're using this type of reclaimed cardboard, make sure you give a light sand to the finished outside face, because these types of boxes are coated in a little bit of plastic, so they don't glue down very well unless you scuff them up. Like I said, I have an old chip brush that I use specifically for wood grain, and just generally the rattier your brush is, the better. You can get dollar store brushes and sort of cut them up a little bit or just kind of slam them. These are just brushes I've had forever, and I keep it specifically for wood grain. So I'm using a darker black and some burnt umber to do my grain pattern. A little bit of the burnt sienna also. And you can always use your base color. That was the yellow ochre. You can use your base color to, if you get a little too deep into the dark, to sort of temper it a little bit. So you keep a little water handy. So squeeze out some paint here. Here we go. So I'd like to put a little bit of paint on the brush. You do this in a lot of layers. So you just get a tiny amount of paint on the very tips of the bristles. You don't want to saturate it. Just a little bit of paint on the very tips of the bristles. And you just start sweeping it along your grain. Just sweeping it along the grain. And you just do this over and over again. You add a little bit of paint, a tiny bit of water to get it to blend so you don't have too much color deposit in one spot. You just sweeping it, sweeping it, sweeping it. It's really easy because wood is got a lot of imperfections. So it's really hard to mess up. Now you want to think about wood in terms of undertones and overtones. So when you think about a table and you look at it and you see what's the color underneath. So you have cherry or mahogany, those colors are going to be more red. You have the older distressed wood, they're gray. So you adjust your base tone according to the look that you're going for. This one is an oak, so my color is a little more yellow. And then for the grain on top, this one is a little bit more distressed, so I'm going with the black. But you can use just the brown if you have like a newer table with less grain or less visible grain. It's really up to you. It's really hard to mess this up. So now I'm going to add some points of interest. These are swirls and knots and places where, the wood may have rotted a little bit. You mix a little bit of your darker pigment with some water and you just put these splotches all over. Not a ton, you don't want to overload it. That would be some really crappy wood. They wouldn't really make planks out of it, but just a few here and there. Now don't worry how these look. We're going to clean these up later. This is just as reference points. So then you take your smaller brush and you just start doing more grain up and down the same pattern, and then you make sure you go around these knots because that's how wood tree rings grow around the wounds. Essentially these are tree wounds and the rings will grow around them, so your grain will curve around. And you want to vary the thickness of the strokes. Some of them are thick, some of them are thin. Some of them are closer together than others. You just want to really be random with it. Okay, so once I have a pattern that I'm pretty good about, now it's time to clean this up a little bit. So you wet your brush, you clean it off, add a tiny bit of water, and you just go over the darker knots and it will start to pull up some of that paint, and you blot it with a paper towel just to make this look a little more natural. We're going to pull up some of this paint and blend it, blending it, blending it, blending it. This is why I like using the cardboard, because adding this kind of water, I can pull up some of this pigment without warping it, or if you were doing this on paper, you might rip the paper because it's too much water. So this cardboard can take a good amount of water. You're not adding a ton, you're just lifting up some of the pigment. So you just run your brush over it and blot it up. And that looks a lot more natural than just, the blob of paint that was there. I like doing it that way because it has time to dry a little when you first put down the blob, and it gives like a really nice outline, and then you lift up some of the paint from the middle. And it just looks like really natural wood. Finger blending is also highly recommended. Fingers are an excellent tool for blending. Better than any sponge. So now I'm just using a little water on my brush and I'm smoothing out some of the brush strokes that don't go all the way across. And I'm lifting up some pigment from the dark areas, so I just have a little tiny bit of water on my brush and I'm just gonna lift some of that up and spread it down. So I have a little dark spot there, so if you have little dark spots you can just sort of lift up some of that pigment. Spread it out. And there you go, that looks like a wood plank. And you can cut that into the shapes that you need it to be, just like if this was a board and you needed to cut it up. So I'm going to do the other one that I did. These are different patterns just to show you and fast forward one more time. This type of cardboard is also really good for taking an acrylic sealer, so you can spray some acrylic gloss or do the brush on kind to give it that nice sheen if you want a shinier wood. That's what I did in the project that I used these for. I gave it a little bit of a light spray with an acrylic gloss, and I had myself a nice wood floor. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure you like and subscribe and share if you want to see more tutorials in all the beans that I'm going to spill and how I make my videos.